I'm Orsted. Welcome to Chief Tony Podcast, recorded here on Treaty 6 territory. Had a special guest here today, my brother and friend, Chief Randy Ermineskin of Ermineskin Cree Nation. We spoke on chiefs, role of the chief, and we had an opportunity to talk regarding UN meetings, whether it's Geneva or New York City. We also went into treaties to share a little bit about that and education. I'm happy and honored to introduce my brother and chief from Ermineskin, Chief Randy Ermineskin, Ogumau Ermineskin. He was also a Grand Chief of the Confederacy of Treaty 6. Tansigya, Ogumau.
Mananto, Kiamaga.
Good. So happy to have you here. I want to welcome you. And before we get started, maybe just for everybody listening, just share a little bit about yourself as well as how you became chief.
Oh, boy. Well, grew up in Maskwacis, well, formerly Hobima, when it used to be called Hobima. And grew up there and went to residential school. I always remember that date, 1969, my first day of school, and standing in a big gymnasium, and I was just terrified. But I think I did well and survived, and grew up there from grade 1 to 9, and a product of the residential school. Not the greatest experience, but I think sports saved my life, and managed to play junior hockey and played 1 year professional hockey with Montana Magic in 1983.
Nice.
So and then education is a big part of my life. Like I said, it's the goal I had in grade 3 is our teacher, her name is Miss Richard. I remember that, and the way this happened, I always tell that story, is that she told us to write down three goals, and because of her last name, she lied to us. She said, "My brother is Henry Richard and Rocket Richard," and we believed it. And she said, "Write down 3 goals. What do you want to be?" So I wrote down those 3 goals. I still had that piece of paper, and I said, "I want to be an NHL hockey player. I want to be a phys ed teacher, and I want to own a BMW." 2 out of 3 is not bad, right? I don't have a BMW, but I rode in one. So that's what's unique about it. So I've been successful, and I have 4 degrees. I have a B.Ed. I got a Bachelor of Physical Education. I have a master's degree in leadership, and right now I'm a PhD student out of Gonzaga University.
So tell us a little bit about your role as chief. How did you become chief? How was that whole experience of that path to chieftainship?
Chieftainship, oh man. It belongs to our family. The Ermineskin was the Chief Ermineskin is the founder of Maskwacis, and he is the lead, and he gave land to his brothers and brother-in-laws, and said, this is how it's going to be after Chief Bobtail had signed off. And that's what's unique about it, because the headdress that I wear, those are his feathers. They're over almost 100 years old. That's why I just cherish that thing, and because I'm carrying my ancestors and some of the things that when I wear the war bonnet, I'll say is that I always try to think what was he thinking, because I'm wearing the same feathers that he used to wear, and how did he think? And I'm not going to imitate, but I want to follow after what his thoughts are.
So when you were running for chief, some of the politics on the community, how it gets a little bit tough. How does that path, and how do the people, like the elders and family, they just encourage you to run, or they see you as as part of that lineage, or how did that happen?
Well, that's part of the conversation we have, is that they always say that it belongs in the Ermineskin family. It should remain all the time, right? And so and the unfortunate part is that we got into this Indian Act system of voting in people, and then it should have been hereditary. And so that's all we always talk about, is that one day maybe we'll go back to it. That's a dream, but and when we say we're going to go back to the old ways, I think that's part of the discussion we need to have, is that how important it is, because the people come to me and they say, I took a break, and they came back to me and said, we want, can you come back and help us restabilize and make sure that we're going on the right path? Because the one thing they always say is because you're honest.
I know it's a difficult conversation. I'm sure other communities in different reserves probably thinking the same way, but because of politics, it kind of smokes that, or pushes that intent away. How was regarding the hereditary system?
I think we need to have that conversation. I think if we're going to go back to how our leaders thought, right? And I think the one thesis I read was from one of my late relatives, late Walter Lightning, and he wrote a paper on Cree thought. And that's what's his discussion when he wrote his thesis. And what it says there is that the way our First Nations thought and planned was very, and he coined the word meticulous, careful and thoughtful. And, they just didn't go out there and start something. It was just a process of coming together, making sure that everybody understood what was going to take place. Everybody had a role. Everybody had something to be responsible for. And I think that's something that we need to really think about in First Nations territories in our country, is that if we're going to go on a path to try to do something, we need to think back and say, how did they plan? But I always think about the treaties. They weren't as educated as some of us are now, but man, I always think back, they must have been so smart, so forward thinking. They knew how the struggles we would have in the future, and look at where we are. The treaties still are strong.
Going back to the hereditary system, I know if you look at it, it's just like in ceremony or within a family. The law is the law. So in a case where you're being elected, part of that is some governance, some politics that happens, and then there's the traditional governance that we follow. So if you had a hereditary system, it would probably be more traditional governance. You don't have to worry about the politics of, it would be always for the betterment of the community.
I think that's the important thing that we have to come and really examine, because we have in Ermineskin, we have a constitution that was developed in 1980. And I'm really fortunate to have Dr. Willie Littlechild from my reserve. So he's in my office from time to time, and he often talks about, we need to revise that because everyone needs to know the role of the chief. He's the highest member of society. And he wants to, and sometimes people forget in our communities that why is there a chief, right? And then we need to be serious about that role, is that you're the father of the nation, more or less. Yeah. And you have responsible for not just one thing, but you have to see the entire picture. One decision we make, either good or bad, affects everybody in that community.
So what do you think about, sometimes people talk about, the Indian Act chiefs and councils, like what are some of that? What's your opinion or thought on that?
I think for some that we always say we want to dissolve the Indian Act, but we do have to have something in place, because all First Nations across Canada always wanted. That's the first thing. Well, we need to break away from the Indian Act, but what's going to replace it, right? And the thing we got to really consider there is if other First Nations of the 630 plus decide that, we're going to break away from the Indian Act, but what's going to replace that? And if something happens, it's going to create a legal vacuum where it's going to affect all others. And that's how we have to be thoughtful. And one idea that Willie and I were talking about, well, we should have a First Nations Act. So, but what does that look like, right?
What's your leadership style? How do you build your teams? How do you motivate your teams?
I think the biggest thing is you want to be honest all the time, right? And you want to demonstrate and teach people. That's how it was when my teaching profession. If I was a principal or a superintendent, I always told everybody on staff is that, well, we're all leaders. You're all administrators. And so then the same thing, you want to do that. And then for me, I like to sit and sometimes the first few months of a term, because you always have new people, new counselors that come in for the first time, have really, they don't realize that once they put their hat into the ring, they don't realize that, man, I'm responsible for a lot of things, and they don't understand it. So I try to coach them through, and what are the key terms, and always look for key words when people are talking. But the one thing is I always say, well, if we're going to meet with people, I want a bio on each people that we meet, individual, so we know that, okay, maybe we can comment and compliment each other on certain things, but always be ready and don't always have a iron fist and say, you know what, I'm going to fight. Well, there's ways of building relationships, right? And that's one thing I learned from Willie is that when you go to UN, that's their table. Be as diplomatic as you can be. And that's a hard thing for us in First Nations. We've been hurt in a lot of ways, but we got to come to a place where, you know what, let's put our guard, not put your guard down, but just know that we have to do this, and who we're doing it for is the 7 generations.
Nice. I agree. I mean, not everybody gets to sit at that table, but when we do, we want to make sure that we represent our communities in a good way and honor them, and being diplomatic is very important. Sometimes in our work, we get response from the community. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive. How do you deal with some of the negative feedback that shows up, or even the constructive criticisms that come?
The one thing I'm so happy for, even during COVID, we had general meetings, even whether it was online, and we had individuals from our IT team where they went to the people's homes and say, this is how you can set up. So we had people on screens, and we did a strategic plan. This is what we were planned to do. But I think that the key to all that is that if you don't have anything to hide, why do you fear? Right? Yeah. If you're upfront and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're spending money, but at the same time, when we have plans, we want to include you, right? And awesome. So if they have any apprehension to something, well, we want to know and we want to hear from you. And then this way we knowing going forward that we've consulted with you, and we want to make sure that you understand and it's the best thing for you.
Nice. So you just welcome it and confront it head on.
Yeah.
So going in some of that planning and so on, how do you organize your priorities?
Priorities? Well, I think the biggest thing is that the people come first, right? And because we do not want to make mistakes, and people always remember if you did something wrong, that you're going to be, right, in the community, they're going to say, well, this guy put us in a bad place and a bad situation. But the biggest thing is that we want to, for myself, the way I learned in my studies too, is that you always want to see the bigger picture. If you make one decision, you affect, and I always think about that. If one person's laid off, so to speak, and does that one person may be the only breadwinner, right? How many children and how many of the family members are the ones that are being affected? So I always think about that in that term for, in some situations, that it's so important. Always consider the people and at first, and that, you know, how is it going to affect them? But what is the good thing about that can come out of a situation? I
know you do a lot of, you have a strong background on treaty, and you have studied that for a long time, Chief. How do you say a treaty in your language?
Tipahamaton, like they owe us something, right? In exchange for the land. And that's something that we always have to think about, is that as much as, like I said, going back to our forefathers that signed treaties, I always think about, man, they just had this knowledge and this foresight, knowing that there was going to be, they had to struggle and put their X on whatever, and you know, but they knew that it's going to be tough down there. They went to the ceremony. It's not something where they say, well, I'll invite you, let's sign papers. It was probably a process. And I always tell people that, you know, treaty is important for us, but we got to remember we had a life before treaty. Yeah. We had a governance system, and we had a way of managing our people. And they always had a plan that everybody, like I said, everybody had a role. Everybody had a responsibility. So they knew when the chief spoke, or when the elders spoke, or the mother spoke, everybody had a role in that society.
Nice. So how do you share the spirit and intent of treaty?
I think that's sharing Venice, because I just taught a course at the university, and it was just more on the historical perspective. I had this whole lesson plan and unit plans ready, but instead, when I first started, I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to history. So Sharon Venn came in and talked about the history and said, the prince, what does the white stand for, right? What does the blue stand for? It's for water. You know, all, and the green, what does it stand for? The grass. You know, it was just so important for us when we go there and recognize before even the Treaty 6 medallion was in place, right? It gives us a picture of what the handshake meant. And there's a you know, that axe and that knife in there that we have to remember that it's just to share the land.
Nice.
But I think the important part is just realizing that when the prince remind us that how sacred those treaties are, let's not play around with them.
Awesome. So a lot of young people, they kind of, you know, just imagine what the treaty is, and what can you say to them to learn more about that? Like you said, you know, just to listen to the knowledge keepers as they share their knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's what we're starting to lose, a lot of those storytellers, that the knowledge keepers that are passing on, and we need to capture that. And one thing that's unique in Maskwacis is that at our college we have a lot of recordings. So we record everything that everybody is saying, not to try and match up with what, but the story remains and it's consistent. That, you know what, how important it is that what we are enjoying, as like I said, the government has been trying their best to take away our treaties and downgrade them to a place where you guys become regular citizens. We have to maintain and remind them that, you know what, the land, you wouldn't have ever survived here. And that's one thing I always say that I was been told, is that they would never have survived here when they first came and settled here, because our people showed them how to live. And that's the thanks they gave us.
Yeah.
They pushed us aside. So they were more interested when they first settled on this land years ago from the shores. They seen the Indians there, but they looked beyond, and they said that's one thing that Danica Littlechild has told me. Said they're more interested in the land than the people.
And for us too, it's about the land for us too. A treaty's been about the land, and we promise to share it to the depth of the plow.
Yeah.
You know, like a lot of that. How can we strengthen this in our communities?
I think the land-based teachings would be important, that we go back there. And one of I belong to a Indigenous education degree program in Maskwacis, and we're developing year 1 to 4. We're at year 3 right now, and we'll be gathering here in the next little while. And one of the and for us, that the theme is to develop a compassionate teacher. Right? So all of us should have compassion for what we do. But the thing that they say in Cree is achak, the spirit. Get into that spirit of that individual you're teaching. Because, you know, and we go back, and he said, at the first class, they always say, go outside, get everybody to go barefoot and walk on the land, and tell them, there's so much power in the land.
How are the young people taking to that?
They're excited. And we did our Ermineskin. I'll say for Ermineskin, we dedicated $35,000 to the college last year to have a leadership. And it went from everything from the historical, right, to the modern day, and how the treaties were signed, and the direction we need to go. And we even showed them our constitution. They said, "Oh man, we didn't know that we had a constitution."
Oh wow, that's awesome. The young people must have enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, and you know what the ending was? And I never really, it just took me aback, because as a teacher myself, one of our leaders from the college, her name is Becky Cardinal Rattlesnake, and she had him in a hand game. And the kids were just shy and just, I don't want to be involved. Within half an hour, those kids were just right in there, just having fun, laughing, and man, just, I think that some of the things that we take for granted and say, yeah, those are hand games, well, I don't want to go that. I learned quite a bit from that observation. I thought, you know what, if we're going to start teaching everything from land-based, well, let's include everything that we should, you know, so that the kids can go away saying, you know what, maybe I didn't learn so much in this situation, but I might have taken something away from here.
How about the language? How was that strengthened, or how was that incorporated into all of the schooling or programs, or even at the administrative level?
We have in Ermineskin, we have Cree language classes for all the staff every Friday. so that the staff come in, and it's even non-native. So they get in there, and even in our schools, we have our Maskwacis Education School Commission, and all the teachers are encouraged to take the Cree classes, and also our college, so that it's constant, because we made a declaration in Maskwacis in 2014 that Cree is our official language.
Awesome. That's pretty awesome. Yeah, we need more of that. I know in Alexis, we're just starting that. So we went from it being taught in the school. So now we've been infusing it, pushing it into the administration programs. We had so a lot of some of the council, they're very fluent. They got some very ancient language, but they don't want to write it. So there's that hesitation to document it, because we've been told it's oral teaching, right?
Yeah.
So there's that bridge that's happening, but the young people, they can write it, but they can't speak it. So we're in a place right now, we're trying to create this bridge. So it's pretty awesome to hear that. And us too, we're starting to go into all the departments where you have to have a literacy instructor in every department. So it's awesome. I know, Chief, you've been to a lot on you have a lot of experience at the UN. You mentioned that, and Chief Willie as well has done some amazing work for the people. Maybe share a little bit of the story about that, and spend some time in and around that, even the process of how to get there. What's it like when you're at the UN? Like, how many, I hear, some of us, we like to talk and long-winded, but you only get a fraction of a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Just bring us into some of that light.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is that the reason why in 1984 or 1974, sorry, when Willie was just graduated from the law program here at U of A, and the elders brought him, and because of all the pressures, the white paper, the red paper, all these things that were just being thrown at our First Nations across this land, and Maskwacis Cree chiefs at the time, and the elders, they came together in 1974, and then they brought Willie and said, you know what, Willie, we appreciate what you learned in your formal education, in your law degree, but now we want to send you, because our governments aren't listening. Let's go internationally. And that's how it started. But at the same time, they told him, well, you learned this new stuff, you learned how they operate, but we're going to give you a Cree. We're going to take you to Cree school now. So they told him about the old stories. And before he left, he said that's what's grounded him. And I think that's so important for us to recognize, because what they told him, and a lot of these Cree terms, like you hear about in the government say, well, we want a protocol agreement with First Nations. But for us, protocol means multiple things, right? We have protocols for certain things we want to gain knowledge, right? So we have to address those things, because in our languages, for us in Cree, one term can mean multiple things, but it means much more to us. And that's something that when we went to the UN, we really examined that it's so important that it's their table. But at the same time, like what I said earlier, is that we have to be as diplomatic as we can be. But at the same time, we're not going to hide anything what the government has treated us, and trying to dismantle the treaties. So that's why we decided to go to the UN. And like you asked, like, how much time do you have? 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Right. And the first time I ever spoke was in 2000, and it felt like, and the cameras are on you. There's thousands of people sitting there. And I was just sweating bullets the first time, and I still remember that time, because I remember Rodriguez, he had passed away, our special rapporteur at the time, and I went to the back. My face was just, I was wiping my face because I was just sweating. I was just ready to cry. But he just came and hugged me and said, "You did such a good job." I think that was the affirmation I got myself, that, you know what, I belong here.
Nice.
And we belong here.
There's been a lot of work at the UN. One of the UN declaration, of course. To share a little bit about that and what you know.
The UN declaration, you know what? That I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of people, and Willie has reminded us. People call it undrip. He said that doesn't sound right, right? Because it's something like something's dripping, and he said he called it the UN deck. And it's so important for us, because a lot of our the articles that are mentioned in the UN Declaration, a lot of people they scoff at it. But I think one thing that you have to remember is that so many Indigenous people across, not just in North America, but abroad are using that to reminding the governments, you know what, we have a right to consult with us. You have a duty to consult with us. You have a duty to remind that we have treaties back home that you haven't honored. And that's a reminder for them. And that's one thing that we have to, I think, take into consideration is that how important it is that to continue to press them that, you know what, we're not going away. And neither are our treaties, because you know what, at the time it took us 8 years to get the S in peoples, and that's the reason why I'm saying that to everyone is that they didn't recognize us as human beings. If you think about that for a while, and we haven't been considered as human beings, you're just savages, and you know, and there's many terms that they've used against us, but it took 8 years just to get that S and just in that peoples. Right?
Yeah.
That's such an integral part of this whole thing. But Maskwacis alone had, and they're proud to say that. And people can be as negative as they can, say the UN Declaration is not for us, but people use it. In a lot of their instruments when they put in a paper somewhere or whatever, you know, if it's a position paper, why it's so important for us, because we had to go there. I remember sitting at the first ever time I went there, and it was 1978, and 88. The first time I went there, and we had a table set up where the First Nations sat, and right across the table facing us was Canada. I said, "Hey, aren't you supposed to be on our side?" I was offended, but at the same time, I knew, you know what, they're here to defend themselves, and we have to defend ourselves as well.
I've never been there. But how important is to have the international community to be witness to some of the activities or the policies or how our people are being treated? How does that benefit? How does that create a bridge for us?
For us, I think that's important because they have permanent forums on human rights as well in September. And it's always nice that you pay attention to what's happening out there. And right now, IORD from Maskwacis has been formed, and we recreated that board so they recognize, the UN United Nations recognizes IORD as an entity. And so we need to continue to use that to our advantage and plan well ahead when these forums are placed, because there's some good things that can come out of there where we put a position paper in or whatever it is that we want to make sure that's known to the international community, that it's not just us, but everybody's going through a similar situation. And it's always nice to unite and come to a place where, you know what, let's go this route together. So it's because the one thing I was in when I first got there, and I looked at the room, I was, oh, what an amazing place. But they said, well, you can ask for the ceiling, but if you get the floor, that's something else.
Nice. So how does Canada behave in that? Especially, like you say, you're sitting right across them. And we know what Canada's experience has been here, even the U.S. How do they behave in that environment there?
You know what? It's interesting. I just bought a book here, and when we had the Treaty 1 to 11 meetings, one of the lawyers that was there, and I can't remember his name, he talked about a book, and for me right now, for my PhD program, I'm reading 15 books a course. So I'm taking 3 courses at a time. So you imagine the amount of reading I'm doing right now.
Wow.
But he suggested a book to me, and he said, Reconciliation Without Recollection. Think about and I always want to make sure that when we pick up a book or anything, we always look at the key words, reconciliation without recollection. So they're denying everything. Oh, we gave the First Nations on land claim settlements and the same area as some country in Europe where, you know, it's tiny little countries in Europe, right? How can you compare that to Canada?
Wow.
So, you know, they're always forever defending and saying, well, we treat them right.
Wow.
But at the same time, you know, they're still, as soon as they leave that meeting or while they're at that meeting, they're writing something to try and dismantle our treaties.
Yeah, so just talking about Canada, I mean, don't want to jump back, but you know how we have treaties and the UN, they're being questioned at the UN. Canada's always coming up with these new agreements. There's 10-year agreements, and we have people who look at those agreements on one part where they're for it, and then there's some who are against it. Like, how are we doing navigating that scope to make sure that we don't threat or trip up our treaties in any way?
I think the biggest thing for us to really understand as leaders is that AFN, they're people that we recognize to help us get to those tables, but they can't speak on our behalf. We need treaty chiefs to go to those places, but at the same time uniting, because everybody's going on their own. And sometimes when you get there, say, well, we have an agreement in place with this First Nations, and that's, I know some people are desperate because of a lot of hardships there. Some of remote communities don't have access to some of the things that we enjoy out here. And some people don't have the resources to go to battle in court. So sometimes they just do that on purpose to make sure that, you know what, we have an example here. We have to be mindful of there's other things that we need to consider before we get into agreements, that, you know, and the wording is always critical because they're trying to legislate our treaties, and that's where we have to be careful.
Do you think, Chief, that we're in a place right now, we got people like yourself, we got scholars, we got lawyers, and we're in that place right now where we're meeting with Canada, we're signing these documents. Do you think we're in that place where they're saying that you guys were fully informed and we had this certain word that was on there that's going to abolish your treaties? Do you think we're in that place right now? We're
getting close. You know, the wording's been changed. Like the buzzword right now is transformation. What's being transformed, right? What's hidden under there, and we have to really take a close and a hard look at some of those things before we sign anything. And so we're always careful about that. And so I'm always treading carefully and making sure I'm not gonna jeopardize and put anybody in harm's way, in that they're gonna suffer in the future generations. And so we have to be mindful of and examine over time what words came in. Like right now, like I said, transformation funding is the key word, 10 years, and there's no guarantees.
Yeah. That's the conversation that we're having everywhere. You know, my community and other communities I've spoken to, they're really afraid of that. So everyone's taking those soft steps that way. So maybe on that too, maybe going to another area, which is your background as well as education. As you mentioned, you got 4 degrees, you're working on your PhD right now. That's a lot of work that you're going into that, and maybe share some of that, what does that day look like for you?
Oh man.
I know being chief is busy already.
Yeah.
So.
Well, first thing, I get up every day, 5:30, right on that dot. It's been like that for a long time. So my day starts early. And so like everything else, like you think about it, everywhere else, somebody's writing something about, to legislate us, and they're starting early. So we have to start getting up early and start praying early for ourselves, for our community, and make sure that we don't take any missteps, right? So it's so important. So I'm already, so by that time, aside from my book work, I'm always looking into what are the write-ups out there, what's happening across other lands, and as far as Ottawa, right? And so we want to make sure we maintain a pulse of what's going on, because it's like what Willie says is that anytime something happens in the U.S. legally, it's coming north.
Oh,
so pay attention to what's happening to the First Nations in the U.S., because they're going to try to do the same thing in our community in Canada.
Are there treaties similar to ours, or? Well,
they think it's a process, is what they call that in the U.S., right? You think about the word process. So we're in the process of eliminating so a lot of them pay taxes. So there's a lot of different things, and you can say, well, you can celebrate them, yeah, but at the same time, they're giving back. For us, we were saying no. You have to continue to provide for us, because that's what it says in the treaty. And that's where a lot of people have a problem and say, well, we're tired of looking after our taxpayers' money is looking after the First Nations. No, we're not. if they really look at the resources and what they've extracted and what's important to us, we need to have that conversation. And it's going to be a difficult conversation. But at the same time, I always tell people, let's get uncomfortable for all because let's talk about the truth.
What's the significance and importance of education for our people today?
Well, I think in many ways it's so important for us to get that education. Not everybody's going to be a scholar, right? You know, there's some people are going to trades and some people will be, even though with all the amount of education I get, I'm never going to get to that place where someone has a history of our people. Right. And that's something that's so important for me. When I always, in my profession now as a teacher and as a chief, I want to make sure people understand when we talk about treaties, I always say treaties is about land. Right. And then they brought the Indian Act is about people. So they brought that in so as that we can behave a certain way. And we've been accustomed to it where, hey, I have to behave in such a way that I have to be out of sight. No, we have a place in society. So that's how they just colonialized us, that we thought that we can't do anything on our own. But now we're starting to have people that are getting the education, they're getting the training, that they know that, and they're hearing the stories of where we need to be. And we have to take pride in that.
That's awesome. Yeah, for sure. Our young people need to start getting into that education. There's some healing that has to happen too. Yeah. Like the way it was introduced, as you mentioned, residential schools, taken away from the homes, put into another environment. You know, if the idea was to just to teach us this new tool, they should involve our leaders, our elders. Yeah. If they sat at that table, I think the education system would have been different today, because in a short time frame, like in probably a generation, we had, like yourself, Chief Willie, and there's others too in my community as well. Now we're looking at having 3 PhDs in our community. So we're starting to see people, embrace education, and then they're growing into it. And at the same time, they're also bridging it with the culture, the heritage of the people. So I think we're on a good path right now, and we're learning that. So something we can learn from that is, our kids need to get to the schools. The parents need to be involved with the kids in the school. And I always make a comparison because, hockey's pretty grand in our communities. And so if there's a hockey practice at 6 or 7 in the morning, our parents wake up the kids early. They get a breakfast. They get them ready. They drive them to that. Can you imagine if they treat our kids like that in school? They would bring the kids early and, get some extra tools for them, extra tutoring and extra whatever, and how to, make them become something more. Because, for example, in hockey, as soon as I tied my boy's skates, my mind was, he's going to the NHL. He doesn't even know how to stand on skates yet. But can you imagine we did that for kids in kindergarten? We're sending them for the first day, and we're thinking a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an accountant, he's going to have his heritage intact, if we taught like that. So maybe you could share some of that, what you've observed in the education system, that bundle.
I think that's so important now, because when I first became a teacher back in the 80s, where I have this degree, I want to come back and teach my people. But my mom came, before she passed away, she said, "I'm so proud of you, son." I had to come close to her in her hospital bed at the time, because I'd go to class at the U of A and go visit her, be with her at the university hospital right after, and stay there till 9-10 o'clock before I went home. He said, "I'm so proud of you. Now you go back and help your people. But the moment you ever start, he said, the moment you think that you're high and mighty and think you're better than everybody else, I'm going to come back from my grave and slap you around," she said. I always think about that. And that's something that even in the leader that I'm at, in the leadership position that I have right now, that's so important to me, because, and even with my father's teaching, because he was in council for over 40 years, and my brother late Jerry was a chief for 20 years. Right. And they always think about that, and how important it is that you be focused, that you're sincere about what you do, but always make sure that you're demonstrating the best possible person you can be, so people can say that, "I want to be like that." Right. And that's something my dad said. And that's one thing I don't do now, even as a chief, that I don't, even though there's invitations to go play golf, even if it's business, sometimes I always think my dad said, you take that job serious. Don't take it for granted. So I'm always mindful and careful about certain things like that. But education is so important for us because that's the way going forward, that if you can get the knowledge of your community and your history, that's going to even make you even stronger when you're able to leave and go further your education somewhere off to your land, because that's how I learned. I went to our cultural college, and a lot of the elder that was there was late Gordon Rain, and man, he used to just he would come into our classrooms unannounced, and everybody stopped what they're doing. He'd tell a story.
Oh.
That was something that just kind of, when I got to the time I got to the University of Alberta, I was just like, hey, I know who I am.
Nice.
There's nobody going to tell me that I'm lesser than anyone else. And that's how it's been.
Awesome. Thank you, Chief. Just maybe last question is next steps. What do you see in your future as Chief, and opportunities and roles? And
I'm flying to Spokane tomorrow and meeting with my supervisor. And I have 3 proposals, and they said, we love them all, but start writing. And I don't want to lose that momentum, right? It's because there's what I'm going to do is what we talked about here is I'm going to write a dissertation. What is a Cree leader? What is a First Nations chief's role? What is it that he has to look at the bigger picture, and how he can teach and continue to make sure those teachings from the past and our histories are told, that so that when they go off and into a territory where they have to defend themselves and write certain things, that they know they have a good foundation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chief Ogimao. Ishnish Haihike and Naskumton. I want to thank Chief Randy Ermineskin for joining me here on this Chief Tony podcast, and I hope you guys enjoy this, and we'll catch you again. Thank you very much for joining us at Chief Tony Podcast. I enjoy being your host. We look forward to more interviews. For that, signing off, Huchumatuan. Huchumatuan is a word that we use in our language, means we'll see you again. There are no goodbyes, but we'll see you again.
The Chief Tony Podcast, brought to you from the heart of Treaty 6 territory. A production by Chief Tony Alexis and pipikwan. The theme music is an excerpt from One More Night by Electric Religious, and the incidental music was created by Matthew Cardinal. To stay connected, visit our website at chieftony.ca. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow Chief Tony Alexis on Facebook and Instagram for the latest podcast updates.